Welcome back to my channel. Today, a crime that shook all of Switzerland. The motive of this crime is shocking. Innocent people lost their lives. I invite you to listen to this horrifying story. It's Monday, December 21st, 2015. Before noon, an elderly couple living in Rupperswil, Switzerland, canton of Argovia, travels by car to visit their daughter Carla. The elderly people drive slowly through the streets of Spitzbergeli, the neighborhood where Carla's house is situated. It's a quiet neighborhood, considered extremely safe. Mostly families with children live here. Most people know each other, and the doors of many houses remain unlocked during the day. Carla's parents bring with them some Christmas baked goods and some of the Christmas gifts intended for their daughter, her partner, and grandchildren. With 3 days left until Christmas Eve, the pre-Christmas mood is everywhere. There are glowing reindeer and snowmen in front of the houses, and the smells of Christmas food sometimes reaches the street. The couple is just about to turn into the small, narrow street where Carla lives, when suddenly they notice clouds of dark smoke floating in the air. They realize that they have smelled it before, but they were sure it was smoke from the fireplaces. Now the air is turning black by the second. Probably something is burning nearby. Carla's parents call the emergency number. It turns out that this one has already been reported, and the fire department is on its way to the site. The elderly people are concerned. When they turn into the small, narrow street where their daughter lives, they are overwhelmed with horror. It's Carla's house on fire. The flames gushing upwards are so big that the red glare falls all over the street. Fortunately, there is a loud siren sound from the distance, and after a short time, the fire trucks and ambulance arrive. Despite the almost paralyzing fear, the parents hoped that their loved ones were unharmed. Perhaps, after all, no one was home. Carla's phone doesn't answer, so the woman's father dials the number of Georg, her partner. The man has surely gone to work in the morning as usual. He must be notified of the fire. Georg picks up the phone. It is exactly 11:40 a.m. "There's a fire at your place, come immediately," says Carla's father. The fire manages to be extinguished within minutes. Unfortunately, inside the house, firefighters find the bodies of 4 people with visible signs of cuts and strangulation wounds. It is also apparent that the fire must have spread through the use of some flammable liquid substance, probably liquid fire starter. Firefighters notify the police. A growing crowd gathers outside Carla's house. The services do not allow anyone onto the property and do not provide any information. Not even Carla's parents know anything, and Georg, who arrived on the scene, is not allowed to see them. The police are already beginning to question the first witnesses and people living nearby. Officers quickly determined that the victims are most likely 48-year-old Carla Schauer Freiberghaus, her 2 sons, 19-year-old Dion and 13-year-old Davin, and 21-year-old Simona, the older son's girlfriend. Their wounds indicate they were murdered, and the perpetrator or perpetrators set the house on fire to cover their tracks. The officers ask George to get into their police car, and only there do they inform him that the bodies of 4 people have been found in the house. The man is shocked, but has to answer detailed questions about what he was doing that day. Immediately afterwards, he is taken to the police station. There he has to hand over his phone, and the police examine his hands for traces of soot. Georg begins to guess that he is suspected of murdering his loved ones. However, he vehemently denies having anything to do with the crime. The police are making further findings. It is already certain that Georg had indeed been at work since the morning, which tentatively provides him with an alibi. Simona probably became an accidental victim, as she had spontaneously decided the previous evening to stay with her boyfriend for the night. It is known that the crime must have been committed between 7:30 a.m. and 11:30 a.m., when the fire department was called. None of the neighbors noticed anything suspicious either in that time frame, or in the last few days, or any time before. Nor did anyone see anyone leave Carla's house or property after the crime was committed. Later that same day, almost all of the people in the victim's immediate circle and George are questioned. Investigators are considering, among others, George's ex-wife and his 19-year-old son as potential perpetrators. However, none of the suspicions are confirmed, nor does anyone know anything about conflicts in Carla and George's entourage, nor has anyone heard about problems in their relationship. On the contrary, everyone, including the neighbors, emphasizes that the partners were happy with each other. After midnight, Georg is released to go home. As for the progress of the investigation, after many hours of hard work, the officers can only conclude that they have not come one bit closer to clarifying what really happened. The next day, the Forensic Institute confirms the identity of the victims and the fact that none of them was alive before the arson. The cause of death of each person was deep neck wounds. The police are working under tremendous pressure from the public, as the case is generating huge interest throughout the country. At the same time, it is already known that the investigation will be extremely difficult, as there is a lack of any leads, and gathering traces is very difficult, as the fire destroyed almost everything. Investigators are asking the media for any information that could be helpful in solving the case. They are hoping that someone, however, saw the fleeing perpetrators or observed something relevant. Almost all the tips that come in after this appeal are useless. There is one exception, however. It comes to light that shortly before her death, Carla had taken money. First, at 9:50 a.m. from a nearby ATM, she was only able to take euro bills due to a technical malfunction of the ATM. Then at 10:10 a.m. from the bank, where she ordered a withdrawal in Swiss francs at the counter. The total adds up to a sum worth 11,000 euros, an amount large enough for investigators to assume that Carla was probably blackmailed by someone. Also supporting this thesis is the fact that Carla, especially in the photo, gives the impression of being nervous. The police publish photos from the bank, and later also from the ATM, along with an inquiry as to whether anyone saw the woman on that day, and perhaps observed that a person brought her by car to the bank, stood nearby, or later accompanied her. Unfortunately, no significant clues are coming in, and this lead, contrary to initial hopes, leads to nothing. The police work 7 days a week, practical 24 hours a day. The special commission that has been set up has 40 people. Further questioning is underway, but the original findings are confirmed 100%. The victims had no enemies, and there were no quarrels between the partners, as Carla's parents, neighbors, friends, and acquaintances unanimously testify. As it seems, the more time passes, the more question marks there are in this case. The robbery motive can hardly be considered an explanation. Would someone actually plan to rob an entire family in order to send one person to get money at an ATM? The risk taken and the loot expected in this case are elements that do not fit together, as the proportions are completely disturbed here. In addition, it is unclear who would let strangers into the apartment and why. Or perhaps the perpetrators entered while pretending to be someone. But why didn't anyone notice anything? Nevertheless, the police finally achieve an important success. Despite the havoc wreaked by the fire at the crime scene, specialists finally managed to secure DNA and fingerprints that most likely belong to the perpetrator, who, it is now certain, acted alone. However, the DNA found at the crime scene is not in police databases, so there is nothing to compare it with. In mid-February, police announced the findings at a press conference. It also sets a reward of 100,000 euros for clues that will contribute to the capture of the perpetrator. Time passes. No details of the investigation are leaking to the media, but the police are working very hard. Investigators assume that the perpetrator was most likely watching Carla's family beforehand, so they ask Google to make available the IP addresses of people who searched for information about the murdered in the time before the tragedy. Once the police receive this data, they reduce it to the addresses of people living in close proximity, as the working hypothesis is that the perpetrator lives there. The next step is to find out whose mobile devices were logging onto masts near Carla's house over the course of several days before the crime, and on the day the crime was committed, December 21st. Thus, the idea is to determine who was near the victim's home at the time. With regard to December 21st, 30,000 numbers are involved. These include people living in the area, as well as those passing or driving by there. Now the investigators are combining information from earlier, determining which of the family's persons of interest were near Carla's home at the time before the crime, as well as on December 21st. Suddenly, they come across someone who stands out in this regard, not because he was around on December 21st, but because he did not appear there on that exact day. The owner of this phone had previously been by Carla's house every day, in the same time frame, while on December 21st, his phone no longer logged in there. This leads investigators to suspect that he may have been at the site, but deliberately failed to take the phone or turned it off. The number belongs to a 33-year-old man who lives less than 500 meters from the scene of the crime. Police now have to get his DNA, and through an unofficial route, so that he can't guess that he is suspected. So investigators simulate a standard roadside check in the neighborhood that includes checking the sobriety of drivers. When the potential perpetrator who is driving is stopped, they ask him to blow into a breathalyzer. The driver's DNA is compared with that secured at the crime scene, and soon it's clear that the murderer has just been tracked down. The man is arrested in his own home on May 12th, nearly 5 months after the crime was committed. On the same day, he confesses and gives extensive testimony. Thomas Nick, 33, is Swiss, unmarried, with no previous criminal record. He has nothing in common with the victims. He didn't even know them before. The man still lives with his mother in the house where he grew up. His father is dead. He died a few months earlier. The perpetrator grew up in good conditions. His childhood and youth went completely normal, without any violent events. At school, he was an ordinary student. Then he took his high school diploma and started college, but dropped out. Later, he started another in a completely different field of study, but after a few months, he also dropped out of it. In total, he studied in this way in 5 different courses, dropping out after a very short time each time. His hobby is soccer. Thomas Nick coached a junior team in the region for years, was active in various clubs, and climbed the career ladder there. He devotedly took care of his 2 husky dogs. He went on long walks with them every day, took lots of photos of his pets, and posted them later on social media. Everyone who knew him emphasizes that he was calm and completely normal, and perhaps the only thing that distinguished him in any way was that he had no friends. He also never had a partner. The perpetrator, at least on the surface, therefore led a completely ordinary life, making it all the more incomprehensible why he chose to commit this monstrous crime. In his testimony, the perpetrator himself explains the background of the crime. A few months earlier, he accidentally met Davin, Carla's 13-year-old son, on the street. He found the boy very attractive. From that day, Thomas tried to appear as often as possible where he expected to meet him, which was mainly on the route leading to Davin's school. The man walked there with his dogs and hoped that in this way he would not attract anyone's attention. Davin fascinated him more and more, but after a while, these encounters were no longer enough for him. He began to devise what to do so that he could realize his fantasies. The scenario he devised was downright elaborate. He designed and printed business cards bearing his name as a school psychologist, and crafted a letter stating that Davin's school management was investigating the bullying of a female student. The perpetrator of this bullying was allegedly Carla's son, and he, Thomas Nick, as school psychologist, was obliged to interview the boy. On the morning of December 21st, the perpetrator went for a walk with his dogs and watched Carla's house. When he saw that Georg was leaving for work at 7:30 a.m., he took the dogs home and returned. He rang the family's doorbell a few minutes after 8:30. He had with him a crafted document, business cards, and a backpack that contained cable, duct tape, and a knife. When Carla opened it, he showed the document and told her everything he had planned. He appeared credible as Carla let him in. He started a conversation with Davin, but after a short time he pulled out a knife and, holding the boy, terrorized the mother, ordering her to bind and gag, according to his instructions, the people in the house. After that, it was easy for him to gain control of everyone. He then ordered Carla to go to the bank to get money. He threatened her that if she notified the police, she would not see her children alive again. She complied, because she believed that the perpetrator was only after the money. However, the woman was wrong. When she returned and handed her assailant 11,000 euros, he sexually abused Davin before her eyes, then attacked her first and then the others with a knife. After committing the crime, he washed himself in the bathroom and cleaned his clothes. He poured liquid fire starter on the bodies of the victims, also poured it on the floors and household items, then set the fire. He left the house, unnoticed by any of the neighbors. A few hours after the crime, he met with friends at a restaurant. He went with them to the casino, where he paid with banknotes received from Carla. He lost a large sum of money. 2 days later, on December 23rd, he posted Christmas wishes for his friends on Facebook and posted Christmas photos of himself with his dogs. Thomas Nick admitted that he planned to commit further crimes along the same lines. He had already prepared the details and addresses of the next victims, and even kept all the items needed for the robbery in his backpack. The perpetrator stressed that the sexual motive, accompanied by a lust for power and control, was central to him in this crime. Money was a subordinate motive. For relatives and those around Thomas, his arrest comes as a shock. The case is also shaking up public opinion and is a major topic in the Swiss media until the trial itself. It took place in March 2018. Thomas N., found to be fully sane, received a life sentence. Relatives of the murdered cannot come to terms with their loss. Georg, Carla's partner, writes down his memories of both that tragic day and the aftermath, an attempt for him to work through the grief he is experiencing. The book is published in 2018, and its title is Forever the Inconceivable Act of Rupperswil and Its Consequences. And that's all for today. If you would like to hear more stories, please like and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, and stay safe.